Hi, thanks for joining us. I'm sitting here with Dr. Joyce Poole, who's a world-renowned expert on elephants, communication, behavior. Welcome, Joyce.
Thank you so much, Meg.
So we've been getting all kinds of great questions, and I want to dive right in. And I want to start with your background. So you grew up in Kenya with your brother and your parents, and I know loving animals, and I'm sure everybody out there who loves animals has sort of, fantasized about what it would be like to grow up alongside animals in such a wonderful environment like Kenya. So what was that like? Was it sort of what we dream about?
It was fantastic. I mean, we spent every school holiday on safari in the national parks, and we had lots of pets, and well, it was just great. We went camping all the time, and having elephants around the tent and lions roaring, and it's like you imagine.
And I heard that you, I think as an 11-year-old, went to go see Jane Goodall talk and kind of got inspired by her.
I did. It was one of her first talks at the National Museums of Kenya, and she was talking about her new study with chimps, and I remember turning to my mother then and saying, that's what I want to do when I grow up.
Why elephants? I mean, of all the amazing animals that you were surrounded by, what was it about elephants that really connected or caught your attention?
Well, when I was a child, when I was 6 years old, we traveled from Malawi. We drove from Malawi up to Kenya and went to Amboseli National Park, where we were charged by this enormous male, and it was absolutely terrifying, and the sort of rush of adrenaline. But then years later, when I had the chance to go back and I knew I wanted to study animals, I had read Ian Douglas Hamilton's book, Among the Elephants, and I thought, if I have a chance to study these animals, they're so social. So, and I just got the opportunity to work with Cynthia Moss in Amboseli.
And so you're very well known for your research with elephant communication, but you didn't actually start by studying communication, right? So how did you start?
I started when I went to Amboseli with Cynthia. She was very focused on the females and the families, and the adult males weren't known yet. So she gave me the job of going out and photographing and identifying, giving a name and a number to all the adult males. And in that process, I started to discover that the individual males were behaving very differently at different times of the year. And quite early on then discovered that African elephants come into this sexual and aggressive period called must. And then I went on to study must for my PhD and my postdoc. And that then led into a study of elephant communication.
So do elephants speak like humans? Is it a completely different language?
Than humans. Elephants don't speak like humans, but I think it's fair to say that they have words. They have sounds that, well, even maybe more than words. I think they can combine sounds and the position of their body to say something very specific, like, I want to go this way, let's go together.
From all the time you spent out in the field with elephants and learning about this communication, are you able now to sort of stand out there and watch an elephant and have a sense of, this is what the elephant is saying right now?
I feel that I am not only able to say, this is what the elephant's saying right now, but also quite a bit about what they're feeling.
Well, I want to transition a little bit into a show that National Geographic did recently covering your work, as well as your brother's, and that's going to air in April, something called War Elephants. So in War Elephants, you and your brother were out in Gorongosa National Park, working with elephants there. So could you tell me a little bit about that story?
Well, the Gorongosa elephants went through a terrible period from the early to mid 1970s until the early 1990s, where they were caught up basically in a war between Frelimo and Renamo, rebels in Mozambique. And the Gorongosa National Park was kind of an area that the two sides were almost fighting over, because there was so much wildlife there that the animals could be used to basically feed the troops. And also the ivory from the elephants was then used to buy arms and ammunition. So the population of elephants before this civil conflict was estimated to be between 2,000 and 4,000 elephants, and after it there was only just over 100 elephants left. So you can imagine the kind of trauma that these animals went through.
So speaking of that trauma, what is the work that you and your brother were doing there, and how do you go from studying communication among elephants to working with these elephants in Gorongosa?
Well, my brother has been working in Gorongosa National Park for quite a few years now, and he kept coming back and saying, "Gosh, Joyce, you've got to come down and see these elephants. They're just, you know, they seem to be so traumatized. You approach them and they either run away or they come out of the bush charging." And then he would come back with more stories saying that people are really terrified by these elephants, and you know, you've got to come down and have a look at them. Maybe you could calm them down. So the idea behind the film, my brother being a cinematographer and working very often with National Geographic, was to see whether we could go down and assess whether these elephants could be calmed down, whether they could be tamed. Because right now, Gorongosa National Park is going through a restoration period, and it's very important for tourism that the elephants are calm, because if they just go rampaging around, people won't come.
Why is that important, though? I mean, I can see why it would be good for humans, a little bit safer if you're not being charged by a massive elephant. But why is it important for the elephants?
Well, you know, wherever there are tourists, and there are tourists, you know, benefiting the park by bringing in revenue, elephants survive better. I mean, you know, if you look at where there's the most poaching right now, it's in parts of the continent that have no tourists visiting. Because then there's no money, there's no revenue, there are no eyes watching, there's no revenue for anti-poaching work.
So Megan from DC asked, they say that an elephant never forgets. Is this really true? And in your experience, do you think that they're able to forgive, if not forget?
Well, it's certainly the case that elephants have extraordinary memories. I know from my own experience with an elephant that it remembered me after not having seen it for 12 years. So these elephants certainly remember what they've been through. And they remember people as being very dangerous predators. They can, you know, you asked whether they can forgive. I think they can forgive, and they can relearn. They can learn what sorts of people come in peace and what sort of people don't come in peace.
And Rob Morley from South Africa was asking, do these Gorongosa elephants really need help? I mean, it's been 20 years since the end of the civil war there. Are they really still feeling the after effects? Well,
Rob, I mean, do they need help? No, they themselves don't need help. They can get along with their own lives. But if in order for tourists to feel safe coming to Gorongosa, the elephants need to calm down a little bit. I mean, there have been cases where tourist vehicles have been knocked over, and you know, that can be pretty frightening. So I think that we can work with the elephants and can get them to understand that tourists visiting the park are not a threat to them.
And beyond this behavior of sort of charging people or charging vehicles, Joan Burke was wondering, does the age of the pack leaders, and thus the knowledge or the memories they've collected during their lives, have anything to do with the behavior and health of the pack? So is are there experiences of certain elephants that were alive during the Civil War kind of trickling down and affecting their health, their behavior, as well as everybody else in the group, some of the younger animals?
Well, absolutely. The young ones learn from the adults. They learn by listening and watching the matriarch. And especially when they're confronted with a situation that means danger to them, everybody turns to the matriarch to see what she will do or how she will lead them. And so it is very important to try to calm these older animals down.
And NetFacts Carr from Washington is asking not about the elephants, but actually the people in the area. So are locals, people who live around Gorongosa Park, are they part of the process of helping to protect the animals and kind of restore the area?
Yeah, you said that was
NetFacts, yeah.
NetFacts, hi NetFacts. Yes, you were asking about the people around the area. You know, I'm relatively new to Gorongosa. I'm not new to elephants, and so when I arrived in Gorongosa, the behavior of the elephants was in a way very familiar to me, but I don't know too much about how the people are being involved in this particular project. I know that people are having a difficult time with elephants. And that the elephants are concentrating in an area of the park that borders farmland. So there is an urgency to try to get these elephants to use more of the interior part of the national park.
You mentioned earlier that that the numbers of elephants have gone down to about 100, or were sort of post-Civil War. Yeah. What are their numbers like now? I mean, how many elephants are we talking about?
We're not actually sure until we get to know them all, but I think the estimate is somewhere between 400 and 500 elephants based on aerial counts.
Wow. And what about new elephants? We've got Susan Palazzolo who's asking, what is the outlook for the young elephants in terms of how long do they live? Are they relocated when they become young adults? Is there sort of work trying to work with the populations of elephants and build that back up?
Susan, there's, I think that Gorongosa is one of the, at the moment, things change very, very quickly in Africa, or can change very quickly, but at the moment, Gorongosa is one of the best places for elephants because there's a huge area for them to roam. There is this great Gorongosa restoration project going on. The poaching at the moment, unlike the rest of Africa, the poaching there is very low, the ivory poaching. And so these animals really have a fantastic chance, really for the foreseeable future. I'm very hopeful.
So getting back to your research more generally, can you tell me what it's like, sort of a day in the life when you're back in Kenya studying these elephants? What's it like to be you?
What's it like to be me? It very much depends on what I'm doing, and I do different things. So, I mean, what I love to do is just be out there and watch elephants and do my communication research or behavioral research. But these days I'm much more involved in conservation. So it's a lot more about sharing my knowledge with other people. I try to take local people out with me to look at elephants, to teach them how to identify different elephants, to teach them how to read the behavior of elephants, how to tell whether an elephant's relaxed or upset, how to understand their communication. So, but my absolute favorite moments are just sitting and watching a family of elephants. We had this wonderful scene a couple of months ago in the Mara where a young female kind of put on a show for us for about, it was about an hour. It was incredible, and she had these two little calves. She was about 12 years old, and she had these two little calves that she was playing with, but she was doing it the whole time watching us, as if the whole antics that were going on were just for entertainment. It was just gorgeous.
So I've never had the luck of being out in the wild with an elephant, and really can only think of times that I've seen them in a zoo or on television, or not had that up close chance to interact or listen to them. And we were talking a little bit earlier about elephant communication and how some of it you can really just kind of feel in your chest. So I was wondering if there's, if you'd be willing to maybe imitate some of the sounds that elephants make. They're quite varied, right?
Oh, they're hugely varied. They're hugely varied. Yeah, I can try. I have a bit of a cold, so let's see.
That might help, though, right?
It might help. It might help. Yeah, elephants have these very low frequency sounds they make, which we call rumbles. And all of the rumbles, except maybe rumbles made by infants, all of the rumbles contain sound below the level of human hearing, but we can hear the upper harmonics. So a rumble sounds something like this. Of course, the elephants would probably think I sound like a buzzy bee or something, because I can't produce those very low frequencies that elephants make. But there are many, many different kinds of rumbles. So there are, the let's go rumble is very unmodulated and flat and lasts about 7 seconds. And then there's a very short call that's made to reassure calves, and there's a sound which is a greeting rumble, and then there's the must rumble. I can't do a must rumble. I can't do a must rumble. And then there are the trumpets, of course, and also many different kinds of trumpets, snorts. Elephants even are capable of imitating sounds, so I have recordings of an elephant imitating a truck. So they make lots of different sounds.
And you've studied elephants in 2 different locations, right? In Gorongosa and then in Amboseli National Park in Kenya.
I've actually studied lots of different places.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
So then are you finding that elephants communicate differently, in different locations? Does there seem to be a common language?
I would guess that there are some sounds that they make that are different from different areas. I mean, of course, each elephant has a voice that is an individual voice and can be recognized by other elephants. But I think that there are certainly some calls that would be pretty universal. And to give you an example, in the film that I hope all of our listeners here will see, in War Elephants, we played a recording that I made in Amboseli, and it was a recording of I guess I can give this away. It was a recording of a baby elephant being pounced on by a lion, and the calls of the mother elephants to threaten the lion, but also to call in reinforcements. And we played this sound to 2 elephants in Gorongosa, to a group of about 30 cows and calves, and my goodness, they came. They came so fast, and it wasn't aggressive. It wasn't like these are stranger elephants, although they would have known that they were stranger elephants. But it was really like, these animals are in trouble, we're going to come and help them.
So pretty incredible. So it does seem like there might be some commonalities in language and.
Yeah, there are some also, we can tell, we can read, even if a person speaks another language, we could read from their expression that when they're upset or whatever. So I think some of these calls that are about basic survival would be universal, and then there might be more complex calls, or maybe we'll learn that elephants have sort of syntax, that they're able to use calls in a particular combination of sounds that to mean something very specific, and maybe that varies from place to place.
Well, Michelle from California is asking, how did you go about learning elephant language? What's that process, and how does it differ from learning human languages?
Well, in some ways it's quite similar, Michelle, because you know, what I did was just sitting there with elephants. So I would sit with a group of elephants that I knew. I'd know who, you know, the matriarch was and who the daughters are and how everybody was related to each other. And then, for instance, I'd hear a particular sound, and I'd notice when that sound was made by a calf, the mother would stop and put one leg forward and allow the calf to suckle. And then I noticed that each time a calf made that same sound, a mother would stop and put her leg forward and allow a calf to suckle. So over time, you begin to build up an understanding that, okay, that sound must be what I call now a begging rumble. It's saying, I want something to eat or drink. I mean, they do use it sometimes. Yeah, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, stop. Yeah. So that's the kind of process.
So elephants are massive. I mean, massive. Have you had any sort of moments where you were scared? I mean, you know, especially as you were trying to figure out what they were communicating.
I've had a lot of times where I've been scared. Mostly in the early days before I really understood, you know, before I was able to read elephants. I got myself into a lot of sticky situations and really thought that was it for me. But that rarely happens now. I'm very respectful of elephants. You know, I read their behavior and I try to respect what they're asking of me. If they're saying they're not happy with me coming any closer, I stop the car. If they're showing me they're afraid, I stop the car. So I'm really working with them the whole time. And I think that when it comes back to the Gorongosa elephants, I think that's what's important. We have to show that we understand their signals.
So the research that you've done in communication in elephant behavior, particularly among males, and like the effect that ivory poaching has had on the social behavior among elephants, a group of elephants, you've contributed to so much to what we know about elephants. But what would you say has sort of been the highlight, or maybe some of the highlights of your research, your career so far? Some of your
discoveries?
Yeah, discoveries, wonderful experiences, aha moments.
Yeah, no, I mean, of course, discovering that African elephants come into must, that was very big. That sort of propelled my career. If I hadn't made that discovery, who knows what I've been doing today. But, and then discovering that elephants are using very low frequency sounds below the level of human hearing to communicate over long distances, and how, you know, which sounds they were using for that long distance communication. Discovering that they're capable of vocal imitation. And also with others making a number of different discoveries, like, for instance, the case in Pilanesberg where the culled babies, I don't know if you know that story. Mm-hmm. Okay, in Kruger, when elephants were culled, some of the babies were then, the survivors, were then relocated and put into different reserves and national parks. And in one case, in Pilanesberg, 80 cull orphans were sort of dumped there without role models. And when those, in the case, young males grew up, they started mounting and killing rhinos. I'm sure you've heard about these elephants that were killing rhinos. Well, it was all these young elephants who had been traumatized through the culling operation and then had no role models. So, so those kind of discoveries, I think, have really helped to begin to see elephants for who they really are, and to begin to think about, you know, what we do to elephants has huge consequences and may have serious repercussions. For instance, now we've got very aggressive elephants in many places in Africa. And I think that's because they're capable of retaliation, of taking revenge. So it's, we have to realize that when we're managing or conserving or protecting, trying to protect elephants, that we're dealing with a very, very complex animal, very intelligent animal.
I have a couple questions that are just sort of about more general elephant behavior.
Yeah.
So Faith from Cincinnati is asking, how long did it take you to make the elephants you studied more comfortable with your presence? You know, so you could start to learn some of this about them.
Faith, I guess you're asking about in general, not the Gorongosa elephants.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate to work in Amboseli where the elephants were already quite habituated to people. But it's fair to say that when I first started working there were elephants who it had gone through a period of heavy poaching on the outskirts of the park, and some of the elephants there were absolutely terrified. But it didn't take that long actually to calm them down. It's just a matter of, you know, that they recognize us as individuals. They recognize our car. They can tell the difference. Their sense of smell is so acute. They can tell whether you're male or female. They can tell, you know, whether you're a tourist or they know everything. So they quickly learn that tourists are not a threat to them, that farmers are a threat to them, that poachers are a threat to them. They can distinguish between, you know, different ethnic groups, different sorts of people.
That's incredible. Avina, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Avina Karasava was asking, elephants seem to pay special attention to younger members. You're talking about, you know, mother and daughters that you've watched. Would you say that elephants provide true parental care?
I mean, absolutely, they do. Well, maternal care anyway, because, you know, the males leave the families when they're about 14 years old. Although there have been also some extraordinary stories about perhaps orphan calves ending up with following around a big male and the big male sort of looking after them. But it's primarily, of course, maternal care and care of young females. And it's incredible watching these young animals. From about 4 years old, the little girls start looking after babies. And they do a fantastic job at it. And it's so sweet to see them, even at an age like 5 and 6, they start pretending to suckle these calves. So they've got no breast, they've got no milk, but they're already practicing for what it's going to be like when they're a mother.
Well, you talked about your current work being very involved in conservation. And a lot of people have been asking, what can we do to help? You know, if we're not out there in the field with you, what can we do? How can we help?
Oh, that's a question that people often ask. I mean, you know, it depends on it kind of depends on the project. We have a project going on in the Mara, which is we're trying to get as many people involved as possible. If you've been to the Mara, you can contribute photographs to help us monitor these animals and tell us where you've seen them. You can name an elephant via this project and make a donation toward the project and help us again monitor the elephants, help us to train local people to protect the elephants. But you can also spread the word about the plight of elephants, whether it's making situations for elephants better in captivity, trying to stop the ivory trade. Right now, there is a desperate situation across Africa, across Asia, with poaching, with ivory poaching, and I don't think people actually realize how desperate it is. We are almost back to the situation, what it was like in 1989 when the elephants were headed for extinction. So we have to find a way to curb the demand for ivory. Most of that is right now centered on the Far East. If any of you can, speak Chinese, have friends in China, help to spread the word. We have got to stop this demand for ivory.
So you now work on a project. You're the director of ElephantVoices. So we need to wrap up. We're unfortunately out of time.
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit about that and challenges that you're facing going forward, hurdles you're trying to tackle and overcome.
Yeah, we're working in the Masai Mara. It's a very well-known population. People visit the Mara, of course, from all over the world. But the Mara population is threatened from loss of habitat, and we are trying to work with the local people, to work with tourists, to follow the movements of these animals and ensure that the particular corridors that they need in order to get to the next habitat are kept open, so that this ecosystem continues to function.
Great. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, and thank you all for sending in your really great questions. I hope you'll join us again next time. We're going to be talking to somebody in the field, one of our explorers in residence, Enrique Sala, who's going to be calling from Pitcairn in a couple weeks' time. So do come back and join us. Thanks.
Thanks.